Vivian de Luca's hands trembled as she piped cream into cannoli shells, trying to pretend the three armed men blocking her family's bakery entrance were just another Tuesday morning in Sicily. They weren't. When Luca Santoro stepped through the door, 6 feet of controlled violence in a €5,000 suit, she knew her small, safe life had just become someone else's bargaining chip. He didn't ask for pastries, he asked for her. And in the 60 seconds it took her father's face to drain of all color, Vivian understood that refusing the island's most dangerous man wasn't an option her family could afford. If you want to see how a baker's daughter survives a world built on blood and power, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Quote, the bakery smelled like butter and lies that morning. Vivian had been up since 4, the same as every day, working dough with her mother while her father fired up the ancient brick oven that had fed 3 generations of De Lucas. The rhythm was familiar, comforting even. Flour on her hands, steam fogging the windows, the pre-dawn quiet of their neighborhood in Palermo's old quarter. She'd thought about university once, about studying literature in Rome, or maybe teaching English to tourists. But those dreams felt childish now. At 18, with her father's back getting worse and the bakery barely breaking even most months, so she piped cream. She glazed sfogliatelle. She smiled at the construction workers who bought espresso and cornetti on their way to job sites, and she told herself this life was enough. It had to be. She was boxing up a dozen almond cookies for Signora Russo when her mother's voice went strange behind her. Vivian, go upstairs. The tone made Vivian's stomach drop. Her mother never sounded like that, tight and frightened, like someone had pressed a knife to her throat without actually touching her. Vivian turned. 3 men stood just inside the doorway, and they didn't look like they'd come for breakfast. 2 of them were built like walls, dressed in dark suits that did nothing to hide the bulk of weapons underneath. They didn't speak. They just stood there, hands clasped in front of them, scanning the bakery like they were memorizing exits. The 3rd man was older, leaner, with silver streaking his temples and eyes that calculated everything they touched. He looked at Vivian's father, then at Vivian, then back to her father. Signor de Luca, the older man said quietly, Don Santoro would like a word. Her father went pale, actually pale, the color draining from his face so fast Vivian thought he might faint. Yes, of course. Now. The word was polite. It was also a command that didn't leave room for negotiation. Vivian's mother grabbed her wrist, hard enough to hurt. Upstairs, now. Mama, what? Vivian, please. But before Vivian could move, the door opened again, and Luca Santoro walked into her family's bakery. Vivian had never seen him in person, but she knew who he was. Everyone in Palermo knew who he was. You didn't grow up on this island without learning which names you didn't say out loud, which men you crossed the street to avoid, which families controlled the docks and the construction contracts and the politicians who pretended they didn't. Luca Santoro was 32 years old and had inherited his father's empire at 25 when a car bomb meant for the old Don had killed him instead. In the 7 years since, Luca had consolidated power with a combination of ruthless efficiency and strategic marriages that tied the island's oldest families together under his control. He didn't make speeches. He didn't appear in newspapers. He simply existed, a gravitational force that bent everything around him. And now he was standing in her bakery, looking at her like she was a problem he'd already solved. He was taller than she'd expected, broader through the shoulders. His suit probably cost more than 6 months of her father's rent, charcoal gray with a faint pinstripe, tailored so precisely it moved with him like a second skin. Dark hair, dark eyes, a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so cold. He looked at her father first, a glance that lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then his gaze moved to Vivian. She forgot how to breathe. Signor De Luca, Luca said, his voice low and even. I apologize for the early visit. Her father's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Luca's attention didn't waver from Vivian. I assume this is your daughter. It wasn't a question. Her father nodded, jerky and desperate. Yes, Vivian, she's a good girl. She works hard. She doesn't... Madsan, I'm aware. Luca took 3 steps forward, closing the distance between them. Vivian's mother tried to pull her back, but Vivian's legs wouldn't move. She just stood there, rooted to the floor, while the most dangerous man in Sicily studied her like she was a contract he was considering signing. Up close, she could see the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow. The precise edge of his jaw. The way his eyes weren't actually black, but a brown so dark it swallowed light. "Vivian DeLuca," he said, and hearing her name in his mouth felt like a door closing somewhere. 18 years old. You graduated from Santa Lucia last spring. You wanted to study literature, but you stayed to help your family instead. Her heart hammered against her ribs. How do you? I make it my business to know things. He tilted his head slightly, almost curious. Do you understand why I'm here? She didn't trust her voice, so she shook her head. Something flickered in his expression, not quite amusement, not quite pity. Your father owes a debt, Luca said. Not to me. To a man named Enzo Carbone, who lent him money 3 years ago to keep this bakery open when the property taxes came due. Your father has been paying interest, but the principal remains. Carbone has been patient, but his patience has a limit, and that limit was reached last month. Vivian's stomach turned to ice. She looked at her father, whose face had gone gray. Papa? I thought I could. Her father's voice cracked. I thought I could manage it, Piccola. I thought. Carbone sold the debt to me yesterday, Luca continued, as if her father hadn't spoken, along with several other outstanding contracts in this district, which means your family now owes me 43,000 euros, plus accumulated interest. The number hit Vivian like a fist. 43,000. They didn't have 4,300. They barely had enough to cover next month's flour order. Her mother made a small, broken sound. Luca's gaze never left Vivian's face. I'm prepared to forgive the debt entirely. In exchange for one thing. Vivian's mouth was so dry she could barely speak. What? You. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into deep water. For a moment, Vivian thought she'd misheard him, but the way her mother gasped, the way her father made a noise like he'd been gutted, she hadn't misheard anything. I don't understand, Vivian whispered. I'm offering you a marriage contract, Luca said, and he might as well have been discussing the weather. You become my wife. Your family's debt disappears. They keep the bakery. They stay safe. Safe from what? From the consequences of unpaid debts. His tone didn't change, but the threat was there, cold and absolute. From the other families who would see your father's vulnerability as an opportunity. From men like Carbone, who don't forgive and don't forget. Vivian's head spun. You can't. This isn't. People don't do this anymore. People like me do. Luca took another step closer. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive. I need a wife, Vivian. Someone with no ties to the families, no history that complicates alliances. Someone I can trust because she has everything to lose if she betrays me. You fit those requirements. I don't even know you. You will. The certainty in his voice made her skin crawl. She looked at her father, desperate for him to say something, to do something, to be the man who'd taught her how to roll pasta dough and told her bedtime stories about knights and dragons. But her father just stood there, shaking. This is insane, Vivian said, turning back to Luca. You can't just buy a person. I'm not buying you. I'm offering you a choice. His eyes didn't soften, but something in his voice shifted, almost gentle, almost. Say no and I'll leave. Your father's debt remains. Carbone's associates will come to collect within the week, and they won't be as polite as I'm being. Your family will lose the bakery, probably more than that. Or I marry you, Vivian finished, her voice hollow. Yes. And if I say yes, then you come with me today. We'll be married within the month. You'll have everything you need, everything you want. Your family will be protected, provided for, untouchable. You'll never have to worry about money or safety or what happens to the people you love. And what do you get? For the first time, something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. A wife who understands loyalty. And a bakery that makes the best cannoli in Palermo. It should have been funny. It wasn't. Vivian looked at her mother, whose eyes were red and swimming, at her father, who couldn't meet her gaze, at the boxes of cookies on the counter, at the flour dust coating her apron, at the life she'd thought was small and safe, and hers. How long do I have to decide? She asked. 5 minutes, Luca said. That's not. 5 minutes, Vivian, because in 6 minutes I have another meeting, and if I leave here without an answer, I won't come back. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her apron, trying to stop the trembling, trying to think through the panic clawing at her chest. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Men didn't just walk into bakeries and propose marriage like they were negotiating a business contract. Women didn't get sold off to crime bosses to pay their father's debts. This was Sicily, not some medieval nightmare. Except it was real. She could see it in the way Luca's men stood by the door, patient and immovable. In the way her father's shoulders had collapsed inward, defeated before the fight even started. In the way her mother was crying silently, tears running down her cheeks while she gripped the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. If I say yes, Vivian heard herself ask, do I ever get to come back? To visit? Of course. This is still your family. But I'd live with you. Yes. In your house. Yes. As your wife. Yes. The word hung between them, heavy with implications Vivian didn't want to think about. Would you? She stopped, swallowed hard. Would you hurt me? Something changed in Luca's face. The coldness didn't disappear, but it shifted, rearranged itself into something she couldn't quite read. No, he said, and for the first time she almost believed him. I have no interest in a wife who's terrified of me. Fear makes people unpredictable. I need someone I can trust. You don't even know me. I know enough. You stayed when you could have left. You work 14-hour days without complaint. You care about your family enough to sacrifice your own future for them. His gaze held hers, relentless. That's the kind of person I can work with. Work with? Like a business partner. Exactly like that. Vivian laughed, a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. You're insane. Possibly. Luca checked his watch, a gesture so casual it made her want to scream. 3 minutes. I need to talk to my parents. Alone. 2 minutes. You said 5, and you've used 3 of them arguing with me. Vivian wanted to hit him. She'd never wanted to hit anyone in her life, but right now she wanted to wipe that calm, controlled expression off his face with her fist. Instead, she turned to her parents. Her father was crying now, quiet and broken. Her mother reached for her, pulling her close, whispering in rapid Sicilian. You don't have to do this, Tesoro. We'll find another way. We'll sell the equipment. We'll borrow from your aunt. There is no other way, Mama. Vivian's voice came out steadier than she felt. You know there isn't. We can leave. Go to the mainland. Disappear. And live like that? Always looking over our shoulders? Always wondering when someone's going to find us? Vivian pulled back, looking her mother in the eye. He's right. If I say no, we lose everything. At least this way. This way you lose yourself, her mother said fiercely. Maybe. Probably. But what choice did she really have? Vivian turned back to Luca Santoro, who waited with the patience of a man who already knew what her answer would be. If I do this, she said slowly, I need your word. My parents stay safe. No one touches them. No one threatens them. They keep the bakery, and they keep their lives, and no one from your world ever comes near them again unless I say so. You have my word. How do I know that means anything? Because if I wanted to lie to you, I wouldn't be standing here having this conversation. I'd have simply taken what I wanted and dealt with the consequences later. Luca's expression didn't change. I keep my promises, Vivian. It's bad for business to do otherwise. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even particularly reassuring. But it was, she realized, probably the truth. She took a breath, let it out slowly. Okay, she said. Her mother made a sound like her heart was breaking. Okay? Luca repeated. Yes. I'll marry you. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Luca nodded, once, a sharp dip of his chin. Good. Get whatever you need from upstairs. You have 10 minutes. What? Now? Now. But I need to... There are things I have to... 10 minutes, Vivian. Anything you need that you can't carry, I'll have sent for later. She stared at him, stunned. You're serious? I'm always serious. And that, Vivian thought distantly, was probably the most terrifying thing he'd said all morning. Her room looked exactly the way she'd left it 2 hours ago. Bed made, books stacked on the nightstand, the poster of Rome she'd tacked to the wall when she was 15 and still believed she'd go there someday. It felt like looking at someone else's life. Her mother helped her pack, moving through the small space with jerky mechanical movements, clothes in a duffel bag, toiletries, the photo of her grandmother, a rosary Vivian hadn't touched in years but couldn't leave behind. "You don't have to do this," her mother kept saying. "We'll find another way." But they both knew she was lying. When they came back downstairs, her father was sitting at one of the small tables, his head in his hands. Luca stood by the window, speaking quietly into a phone. He ended the call when he saw her. "Ready?" "No, not even close." "Yes," Vivian said. Her father stood up, crossing to her in 3 unsteady steps. He pulled her into a hug that smelled like flour and desperation. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Piccola, I'm so sorry." "I know, Papa. I never meant for... I thought I could fix it. I thought..." "I know." When he finally let her go, his eyes were red and his hands were shaking. Vivian's mother kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her hands. "We'll visit," she promised. "Every week. You won't be alone, tesoro. You won't..." "Mrs. DeLuca." Luca's voice was quiet but firm. "She won't be alone." Her mother's expression hardened into something Vivian had never seen before. Pure maternal fury. "If you hurt her," she said, switching to rapid Sicilian, "if you lay one hand on her wrong, if you make her cry or bleed or regret this for even 1 second, I will find a way to make you pay. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you can do to me. You will answer to me." Luca listened without interrupting. When she finished, he responded in the same dialect, his accent flawless. "I understand, and I give you my word. She will be safe." "Your word means nothing to me." "Then judge me by my actions." He turned to Vivian. "We need to go." Vivian picked up her bag. Her hands felt numb. Everything felt numb. At the door, she looked back one last time. At the bakery counter where she'd spent 1,000 mornings. At her parents clinging to each other like shipwrecked survivors. At the life she was leaving behind. Then she stepped outside into the bright Sicilian sunshine and followed Luca Santoro to the black car waiting at the curb. One of his men opened the back door. Vivian slid in, the leather cool against her legs. Luca got in beside her, and the door closed with a solid, final sound. The driver pulled away from the curb smoothly, and Vivian watched her family's bakery disappear in the side mirror. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My estate, about 20 minutes outside the city. And then what?" "Then you settle in, meet my staff, learn the house rules." "House rules?" "Yes." Vivian turned to look at him. He was reading something on his phone, his expression neutral and distant, like he hadn't just upended her entire existence. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Why me? Really, there have to be 1,000 girls in Palermo who fit your requirements. Why go through all this trouble for a baker's daughter you've never met?" Luca looked up from his phone. For a moment, she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Because you're smart enough to understand what's being offered," he said finally, "and loyal enough not to waste it. And because..." He paused, something flickering behind his eyes. "Because when I had you investigated, every single person I spoke to said the same thing. That you're stronger than you look. And I need someone strong, Vivian, not someone who will break the first time things get difficult. What if you're wrong? What if I'm not strong at all? Then we'll both find out together." It wasn't comforting, but it was, she supposed, honest. They drove in silence for a while, leaving the crowded streets of Palermo behind. The landscape shifted from urban sprawl to rolling hills dotted with olive groves and old stone houses. Beautiful, in the particular way Sicily was always beautiful, ancient and sun-beaten and slightly cruel. "Can I ask you something now?" Luca said. Vivian blinked. "I guess." "Do you hate me?" The question caught her off guard. She studied his profile, trying to understand what he was really asking. "I don't know you well enough to hate you," she said slowly. "Ask me again in a month." The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. "Fair enough." They turned off the main road onto a private drive lined with cypress trees. The estate appeared gradually. High stone walls, iron gates that swung open automatically as they approached, manicured grounds that stretched into the distance. The house itself was enormous, a sprawling villa that looked like it had been there for centuries, all pale stone and terracotta tiles and windows that reflected the afternoon sun. It was beautiful. It was also a fortress. Vivian could see the cameras mounted discreetly along the walls, the security stations positioned at intervals, the men in suits who watched the car pass with the same cold alertness as Luca's bodyguards. The car stopped in front of the main entrance. Luca's door opened immediately, and he stepped out, straightening his jacket. Vivian's door opened a moment later. A hand appeared, not Luca's, but one of his men's. She took it and climbed out, her bag clutched against her chest. "This way," Luca said. The entrance hall was cool and dim after the bright sunshine, all marble floors and high ceilings and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. A woman appeared from a side corridor, 50-ish, gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, dressed in simple black. "Vivian, this is Sophia. She manages the household staff." Luca handed his phone to one of his men without looking. "Sophia, this is Vivian DeLuca. She'll be staying in the East Wing. Make sure she has everything she needs." Sophia's expression was carefully neutral. "Of course, Don Santoro." "I have calls to make," Luca said, already turning away. "Sophia will show you to your room. Dinner is at 8. Someone will come get you." And just like that, he was gone, disappearing down a hallway with two of his men flanking him. Vivian stood there, clutching her bag, feeling like she'd been dropped into a foreign country where she didn't speak the language. Sophia cleared her throat gently. "This way, signorina." The East Wing turned out to be an entire section of the villa. A suite of rooms connected by a private hallway, all decorated in shades of cream and gold. Bedroom, sitting room, bathroom that was bigger than Vivian's entire childhood bedroom. French doors opened onto a balcony with a view of the gardens. It was gorgeous, luxurious, completely impersonal. "The closet has been stocked with some basic items," Sophia said, opening a door to reveal more clothes than Vivian had owned in her entire life. "If anything doesn't fit or isn't to your taste, just let me know and I'll have alterations made." Vivian set her bag down on the bed, a massive 4-poster thing that looked like it belonged in a palace. "I don't understand. When did he—" "Don Santoro is very thorough," Sophia said. "Not unkindly, just stating a fact. Is there anything else you need right now?" "About 100 things, starting with answers and ending with a way out." "No, thank you." Sophia nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind her. Vivian stood in the middle of the beautiful, sterile room and tried to remember how to breathe. This was real. This was happening. She'd agreed to marry a man she didn't know, to live in a house that felt like a luxury prison, to trade her entire future for her family's safety. She walked to the French doors and opened them, stepping out onto the balcony. The garden stretched out below, perfectly maintained, dotted with fountains and sculptures. Beyond the walls, she could see the hills rolling away toward the horizon. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. And for the first time since Luca Santoro had walked into her bakery that morning, Vivian let herself cry. Dinner turned out to be a more formal affair than Vivian had expected. Someone, Sophia probably, had left a dress hanging in the closet, black and simple and clearly expensive. Vivian put it on because she didn't know what else to do, and because the alternative was showing up in her flour-dusted bakery clothes. At 7:55, there was a knock on her door. One of Luca's men, she was starting to recognize them, though she didn't know their names, waited in the hallway. "Don Santoro is ready for you, signorina." The dining room was on the ground floor, accessed through a series of hallways that Vivian tried and failed to memorize. The room itself was elegant and understated. Long table, low lighting, more of that expensive furniture that probably had names and histories she couldn't even guess at. Luca stood by the window, still in his suit, though he'd lost the jacket and rolled his sleeves to his elbows. He was on the phone, speaking in rapid Italian that Vivian couldn't quite follow. When he saw her, he held up one finger, "Wait," and finished his conversation. "Sorry," he said, setting the phone down. "Necessary evil." Vivian didn't know what to say to that, so she just stood there. Luca studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "The dress fits." "Yes, good." He pulled out a chair. "Sit." It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't exactly a request either. Vivian sat. Luca took the chair across from her, and almost immediately staff appeared with wine and water and plates of food that smelled incredible. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The food was perfect. Pasta with fresh tomatoes and basil, grilled fish, vegetables that had probably been picked that morning. Vivian barely tasted any of it. "You're not eating," Luca observed. "I'm not hungry." "You should eat anyway. You've had a difficult day." Vivian set down her fork. "Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? Kidnapping? Extortion? Human trafficking, maybe?" Luca's eyebrows rose slightly. "You agreed. Because you gave me a choice between destroying my family and marrying a stranger. That's not really a choice. It's more of a choice than most people in your situation would get." The casual arrogance of that statement made Vivian's hands clench. "You don't get to act like you're doing me a favor." "I'm not. I'm stating a fact." Luca took a sip of wine, watching her over the rim of the glass. "You're angry. That's understandable. But let's be clear about something, Vivian. I didn't create your father's debt. I didn't force him to borrow money he couldn't repay. I simply offered you a solution to a problem that already existed. A solution that benefits you. Yes, that's how transactions work. I'm not a transaction. I'm a person. I'm aware." He set down his glass. "Which is why we're having this conversation instead of me simply telling you how things are going to be." Vivian laughed, sharp and bitter. "Oh, is that what this is? A conversation? What else would you call it? A performance. You pretending to care what I think while you've already decided everything." Something flickered in Luca's expression. Annoyance, maybe. Or something closer to respect. "You're smarter than I expected," he said. "Lucky me." They stared at each other across the table, and Vivian felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing down between them. Fear, anger, the knowledge that she was completely trapped, and he held all the power, and there was nothing she could do about any of it. "I'm not going to hurt you," Luca said finally. "I know you don't believe me yet, but it's true. This marriage serves a purpose for me, yes, but it doesn't require me to be cruel, just practical." "What's the difference?" "Cruelty is wasteful. It creates resentment, instability, weakness. I need none of those things." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I need a wife who understands how to exist in my world without becoming a liability. Someone intelligent enough to learn quickly and loyal enough not to betray me. Someone who can be trusted." "You keep saying that. Trust. But you don't trust me. You don't even know me. Not yet. But I will." His gaze didn't waver. "And you'll learn to trust me too. Eventually." "Why would I ever trust you?" "Because I'm the only thing standing between you and a very dangerous world, Vivian. And sooner or later, you're going to realize that." The certainty in his voice made her skin crawl. Like it was already decided, like her future had been written without her input, and all she could do was show up and play her part. "I want to see my parents," she said abruptly. "Not yet. You said I could visit them." "I said you could visit them eventually, not immediately." "Why not?" "Because right now, anyone watching your family will be wondering where you went. Let them wonder. Let the questions circulate. Let people draw their own conclusions." Luca's tone was matter-of-fact, like he was explaining basic arithmetic. "In 2 weeks, after the engagement is announced publicly, you can see them. Until then, you stay here." Vivian's chest tightened. "I'm a prisoner." "You're protected." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not." Luca stood, moving around the table. Vivian's instinct was to flinch back, but she forced herself to stay still. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "A prisoner is someone being punished. You're not being punished, Vivian. You're being kept safe while I make sure no one decides to use you as leverage against me before the wedding. There's a difference." "It doesn't feel different." "I know, but feelings aren't the same as facts." He held her gaze for a long moment, and Vivian saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Not quite sympathy, but not complete indifference either. "This is hard for you, I understand that, but it will get easier, I promise you that much." "Your promises don't mean anything to me." "Then judge me by my actions, like I told your mother." He turned away, heading for the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, Sophia will start teaching you what you need to know." "About what?" about how to survive here. And then he was gone, leaving Vivian alone in the elegant dining room with half-eaten food and too many questions and the sinking realization that her old life, the one where the biggest decision she had to make was what pastries to bake, was never coming back. That night, Vivian lay in the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling. The sheets were soft, the mattress perfect, the room temperature controlled to exactly the right level of comfortable. Everything was designed for luxury, for ease, for a life she'd never imagined having. And all she wanted was her narrow childhood bed in the room above the bakery, with the sounds of her parents moving around downstairs, and the smell of bread baking, and the familiar, safe certainty of knowing exactly what tomorrow would bring. She cried again, quietly, into the expensive pillows. And somewhere in another wing of the villa, Luca Santoro sat in his office and made phone calls that would rearrange pieces on a chessboard Vivian didn't even know existed yet. Vivian woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and a moment of complete disorientation before memory crashed back in. The villa. Luca. The impossible choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She sat up, pushing her hair out of her face, and noticed a tray on the small table by the window. Coffee, still hot, fresh fruit, pastries that looked like they'd come from a professional kitchen, not her family's modest bakery. A small card propped against the coffee cup read, "Sophia will come for you at 9. It was 8:30 now. Vivian drank the coffee because she needed something to do with her hands, then showered in the enormous marble bathroom, trying not to think about how much this one room probably cost compared to her parents' entire apartment. The closet had more clothes than yesterday. Someone had been in here while she slept, adding things. The thought made her skin crawl, but she forced herself to pick out jeans and a simple shirt, refusing to wear another one of those expensive dresses unless absolutely necessary. At exactly 9 o'clock, there was a soft knock. Sophia stood in the hallway, her expression as neutral as before. "Good morning, signorina. Did you sleep well?" It was such a normal question, like this was a normal situation. "Fine," Vivian lied. "Don Santoro asked me to show you the estate today, help you get oriented." Sophia's tone was professional, almost kind. "Shall we?" They walked through hallways that all looked the same to Vivian, elegant, impersonal, designed to impress rather than comfort. Sophia pointed out rooms as they passed. The library, the formal sitting room, the secondary dining room apparently used for smaller gatherings, an office suite where Luca conducted business, a gym that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. "You're free to use any of these spaces," Sophia said, "except Don Santoro's private office. That's off limits unless he invites you." "And if I want to leave?" Vivian asked. "Go outside the estate?" Sophia's pause was almost imperceptible. "That would require Don Santoro's approval. So I'm a prisoner." "You're protected," Sophia corrected, echoing Luca's words from last night. "There's a difference." Vivian didn't argue. What would be the point? They ended up in a sunlit room on the ground floor that looked out over the gardens. Comfortable furniture, bookshelves lining one wall, a piano in the corner. It felt more lived in than the rest of the house, almost warm. "This is the informal sitting room," Sophia said. "Don Santoro thought you might like to spend time here. It's quiet, private. The door's locked from the inside if you want to be alone." It was a concession. A small one, but still. Vivian filed that information away. "How long have you worked for him?" she asked. Sophia smiled slightly. 12 years. Since he was 20, just starting to take over his father's responsibilities. "And you've never wanted to leave?" "Leave for what?" "Don Santoro is a good employer, fair, generous. He takes care of the people who are loyal to him." Sophia's expression softened a fraction. "I know this is frightening for you, signorina, but he's not a monster. Whatever you've heard about him, whatever you think you know, give him a chance to show you who he really is." Before Vivian could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Luca appeared in the doorway, dressed more casually than yesterday in dark pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. "Sophia, thank you. I'll take it from here." Sophia nodded and left without a word. Luca stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Vivian's instinct was to move back, put distance between them, but she forced herself to stay still. "How was your first night?" he asked. "Awful." He had the decency not to look surprised. "I expected as much." "Did you? You left everything you know to live with a stranger who holds your family's future in his hands. I'd be concerned if you were comfortable. Luca moved to the window, looking out at the gardens. But it will get easier. You keep saying that because it's true. He turned back to her. I need to explain some things to you about how this is going to work, about what I expect. Vivian crossed her arms. I'm listening. The engagement will be announced publicly in 1 week. There will be a formal dinner here, families from across Sicily, important business associates. You'll be introduced as my fiancé. You'll smile, say very little, and let me handle the politics. What if I don't want to smile? Then don't. But understand that everything you do at that dinner will be watched, analyzed, discussed. People will be looking for weakness, for cracks they can exploit. The better you perform, the safer you are. Perform, Vivian repeated. Like I'm in a play. Exactly like that. Luca's expression didn't change. This world runs on perception, Vivian, on power and the appearance of power. You're about to become part of that. The sooner you learn to navigate it, the better. And if I refuse to play along, then you put yourself at risk, and your family. He said it matter-of-factly, without threat, just stating consequences. I can protect you from a lot of things, but I can't protect you from your own mistakes. Vivian's hands clenched. You're asking me to pretend to be someone I'm not. I'm asking you to adapt. There's a difference. Luca took a step closer. You're smart, Vivian. I've seen that already. Use that intelligence. Watch, learn, figure out how to survive here. Because like it or not, this is your life now. The words landed like stones, heavy and final. What else? She asked quietly. The wedding will be 2 weeks after the engagement dinner. Small ceremony, immediate family only. My priest will officiate. Afterwards, there will be a larger reception. Same rules apply. Smile, stay close to me, don't speak unless spoken to. You're really good at giving orders. It's what I do. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. You'll get used to it. Don't count on it. This time he definitely almost smiled. Fair enough. They stood there in the sunlit room, and Vivian tried to reconcile the man in front of her with the reputation that had haunted her childhood. Luca Santoro, the crime boss, the man who'd inherited an empire built on violence and fear. The person who'd walked into her bakery and bought her like she was another asset to acquire. But looking at him now, she saw something else too. Exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. A tension in his jaw that suggested he was carrying weight she couldn't see. And when he looked at her, there was something in his eyes that wasn't quite as cold as she'd expected. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Why does it matter if I'm comfortable or not? You have what you wanted. The marriage contract, the alliance, whatever political game you're playing. Why bother trying to make this easier for me? Luca was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Because I meant what I said yesterday. Fear makes people unpredictable, and I need a wife who can think clearly, act strategically, be trusted in situations where I can't be there to manage every detail. He held her gaze. A terrified, resentful prisoner isn't useful to me. A partner who understands what's at stake and chooses to work with me instead of against me. That's valuable. So it's still just strategy. Everything is strategy, Vivian. The sooner you accept that, the better you'll understand how to protect yourself. There was logic in what he was saying, cold and ruthless as it was. And maybe that was the most unsettling part, that his reasoning made sense. What if I can't do this? She asked. What if I'm not strong enough to be what you need? Then we'll both find out. Luca moved toward the door, then paused. Sophia mentioned you asked about leaving the estate. Vivian tensed. I did. In 2 weeks after the engagement is public, you can visit your parents, but not alone. One of my men will go with you. I don't need a bodyguard to visit my own family. Yes, you do. Because the moment our engagement is announced, you become a target for anyone who wants leverage against me. And your family becomes a pressure point someone might try to use. His tone was firm but not unkind. I know you don't like it, but this is non-negotiable. Everything with you is non-negotiable. Not everything, just the things that keep you alive. He left before she could respond, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Vivian sank into one of the chairs and put her head in her hands. A week. She had a week before she'd be paraded in front of Sicily's criminal elite like a trophy. 2 weeks before she'd be married to a man she barely knew. and apparently the rest of her life to figure out how to survive in a world where trust was currency and weakness could get you killed. The door opened again. Sophia appeared with a tray of tea and what looked like a thick binder. "Don Santoro asked me to go over some things with you," she said gently. "Information you'll need for the engagement dinner." Vivian looked at the binder. "What is that?" "Names, faces, family connections, who's allied with whom, who has grudges, who can be trusted, and who absolutely cannot." Sophia set the tray down and opened the binder. "You'll need to memorize all of it." The pages were filled with photographs, detailed notes, relationship diagrams that looked like something out of a spy thriller. Dozens of people, all connected by lines indicating alliances, marriages, business deals, blood feuds. "This is insane," Vivian whispered. "This is survival." Sophia pulled up a chair beside her. "Shall we start with the Rossi family? They're Don Santoro's oldest allies, but they have 3 sons who all want more power than they currently have. Dangerous if you're not careful." And so Vivian's education began. Over the next several days, she learned more about Sicily's criminal hierarchy than she'd ever wanted to know. Sophia was a patient teacher, walking her through the complex web of relationships that governed Luca's world. Who could be trusted with small talk but not secrets? Who smiled while plotting betrayal? Which families had lost sons to Luca's consolidation of power and might harbor resentment? Which women would pretend to be friendly while looking for weaknesses to exploit? "Victoria Marchesi will try to intimidate you," Sophia said, pointing to a photo of a stunning woman in her 40s. She was supposed to marry Don Santoro 5 years ago, before the arrangement fell through. She's never forgiven him for choosing someone else. He was engaged before? Almost. The alliance would have united 2 major families, but the bride-to-be died in a car accident 3 weeks before the wedding. Sophia's expression was carefully neutral. "Some people say it wasn't an accident." Vivian's stomach turned. "And you think she'll come to the dinner?" She never misses an opportunity to remind Don Santoro what he lost. There were weapons training sessions too, which Vivian hadn't expected. A quiet, efficient man named Marco taught her how to handle a handgun, though she was terrible at it and hated every second. "You probably won't ever need this," Marco said, adjusting her grip. "But if you do, you need to be able to shoot without thinking. Muscle memory." "Why would I need to shoot anyone?" Marco just looked at her and Vivian understood. Because in Luca's world, violence wasn't an aberration. It was a tool, always within reach. Luca himself was mostly absent during those first days. She'd catch glimpses of him, walking through the halls with men in suits, speaking rapid Italian into his phone, disappearing into his office for hours at a time. Sometimes she'd hear raised voices behind closed doors, though never his. Luca's voice always stayed level, controlled, terrifyingly calm no matter what was happening around him. They had dinner together twice. Stilted, formal affairs where they ate in near silence while Vivian tried not to think about the fact that she was going to marry this stranger in less than 2 weeks. On the 4th night, though, something shifted. Vivian couldn't sleep. She'd tried for hours, but her mind wouldn't settle. So she finally gave up and wandered downstairs, thinking maybe the library would have something to read that wasn't a criminal empire organizational chart. She found Luca there instead. He was sitting in one of the leather chairs by the window, a glass of whiskey in one hand and a book in the other. He'd ditched the suit jacket and tie, and his shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. He looked more human like this, less like the untouchable crime boss and more like just a man who couldn't sleep either. He glanced up when she appeared in the doorway. "Can't sleep?" "No, neither can I." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Join me if you want." Vivian hesitated, then stepped into the room. The library was quiet, lit only by a single lamp and the moonlight coming through the tall windows. She sat down, curling her legs under her. "What are you reading?" she asked. Luca held up the book. "Poetry. Dante, from the look of it." "You read poetry?" "Sometimes." He set the book aside. "Does that surprise you?" "A little. What did you expect? Gun catalogs? Financial reports?" "Something like that." He almost smiled. "I read those too, but sometimes—" He paused, taking a sip of whiskey. "Sometimes I need to remember there's more to the world than ledgers and body counts." It was the most personal thing he'd said to her since they'd met. Vivian studied him in the low light, trying to understand this man who commanded an empire with ruthless efficiency, but read Dante alone in the dark. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Why me? Really? Not the practiced answer about loyalty and strength. The real reason." Luca was quiet for a long time, staring into his glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, almost vulnerable. "Because everyone else I could have chosen came with expectations, with family agendas and political complications, and histories that would have turned the marriage into another negotiation, another battlefield." He looked up at her. "You don't have any of that. You're not connected to the families. You don't want power. You just want to protect the people you love. That makes you controllable, trustworthy." He leaned forward slightly. "Everyone in my life wants something from me, Vivian. Territory, money, influence, the right to say they have my ear, but you didn't want any of this. Which means when you make a choice, I'll know it's real, not calculated for advantage." That's a lot of faith to put in a stranger. Maybe, but I'm good at reading people. And I think you're exactly who you appear to be. Someone who keeps promises. Someone who doesn't know how to be dishonest even when it would serve you better. His gaze held hers. Am I wrong? Vivian wanted to say yes, wanted to prove he didn't know her at all, but the truth was, he was right. She'd never been good at lying, even when she should have been. "No," she admitted, "you're not wrong. Then trust works both ways. You'll learn to trust that I mean what I say, and I'll trust that you won't betray me. Even though you're forcing me into this, I'm offering you a trade, your cooperation for your family's safety. That's not force. It's just an unequal negotiation." He stood up, crossing to a cabinet against the wall. "Do you drink whiskey?" "I don't know. I've never tried it." Luca poured a small amount into a second glass and brought it to her. "Try it now." Vivian took the glass, sniffed it, and made a face. Luca's mouth twitched. "It's an acquired taste." She took a tiny sip and immediately regretted it. The whiskey burned all the way down, harsh and smoky and absolutely terrible. "That's disgusting," she gasped. This time Luca actually laughed. A real laugh startled out of him, and it transformed his entire face. Made him look younger, almost kind. "Most people don't develop a taste for it until they've had something to forget," he said. "Is that why you drink it?" The laughter faded. "Sometimes." "What do you need to forget?" "That's a longer conversation than we have time for tonight." But he didn't move away. Instead, he sat on the arm of her chair, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "Tell me something about yourself. Something I don't already know from the background check." "You had me investigated." "Of course I did, but files only tell you facts, not who someone really is." Vivian thought about it. "I wanted to be a teacher, literature. I used to imagine standing in front of a classroom, helping kids fall in love with books the way I did." "Why didn't you?" "Because my family needed me more than some hypothetical future students did." She set down the whiskey glass, unable to take another sip. "What about you? If you weren't this, what would you be?" "I don't know. I never had a choice." Luca's expression was distant. "My father started training me when I was 8. By the time I was 12, I knew more about running the business than most of his lieutenants. When he died, there was never a question of what I'd do next. It was just this." "Do you ever regret it?" "Every day." He said it so simply, so honestly, that Vivian's breath caught. But regret doesn't change anything, so you adapt. You do what needs to be done. You protect the people who depend on you and try not to think too hard about what you've lost along the way. They sat in silence for a while, and Vivian realized something strange. She wasn't afraid of him right now. Not in this quiet room with the moonlight and the whiskey and the unexpected admission that he was just as trapped by his life as she was by hers. "The engagement dinner," she said finally. "What do I need to do?" "Stay close to me. Don't wander off alone. If someone asks you a question, keep your answers brief and deflect to me whenever possible. And if Victoria Marchese approaches you, be polite, but don't engage." He met her eyes. "She'll try to get under your skin. Don't let her." "What if I can't pull it off? What if I say the wrong thing, or then we'll handle it, together." Luca stood up, taking her empty glass. "You're not doing this alone, Vivian. I know it feels like it, but you're not. It should have felt like manipulation. Like he was just saying what she needed to hear to keep her compliant, but the way he said it, the steadiness in his voice, it almost felt genuine. "Why are you being nice to me?" she asked. "Because you're about to become my wife. And I'd rather have a partner than an enemy sleeping 3 doors down." He paused at the library door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow Sophia's going to take you into the city. You need a dress for the engagement dinner. I thought I wasn't allowed to leave." "You're not leaving. You're shopping with an armed escort." He almost smiled again. "There's a difference." After he left, Vivian sat in the library for a long time, thinking about the man who'd bought her like a commodity but read Dante in the dark, who commanded an empire but admitted to regret, who was either the best liar she'd ever met or something more complicated than she'd expected. She still didn't know which. The next morning, Sophia appeared with 2 of Luca's men and a black SUV with tinted windows. The drive into Palermo felt surreal. Vivian had lived here her whole life, but seeing the familiar streets from behind bulletproof glass with armed guards flanking her changed everything. The boutique Sophia led her to was exclusive enough that it didn't have a sign. Just a pristine storefront in an expensive neighborhood where the owner knew Sophia by name and immediately ushered them into a private fitting room. "Don Santoro has excellent taste," the woman said, already pulling dresses. "Let's find something that makes his fiancée unforgettable." Vivian tried on 7 dresses. Each one was more beautiful and expensive than anything she'd ever worn. But when she put on the 8th, a deep emerald silk that fit like it had been made for her, Sophia smiled. "That's the one." Vivian looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked sophisticated, elegant, like someone who belonged in Luca's world. It was terrifying how easily she could be transformed into someone else. "I'll take it," Sophia said to the owner. Afterwards, they stopped at a cafe. Sophia's phone rang constantly. Staff issues at the villa, questions about the engagement dinner. 100 logistical details that apparently required her input. Vivian sat with her espresso and watched the city go by outside the window. Her bakery was 3 blocks away. She could see the corner where the building stood, could almost smell the bread baking. "Can we drive past it?" she asked quietly. Sophia looked up from her phone. Understanding crossed her face. "I'm sorry, signorina. Don Santoro was very clear. No contact with your family until after the engagement announcement." "I don't want to go in. I just want to see it." Sophia hesitated, then made a quick call, spoke in rapid Italian, listened, finally nodded. 5 minutes. From the car only. The SUV circled the block slowly. Vivian pressed her face to the window as they passed the bakery. Her mother was visible through the front window, serving customers. Her father was probably in the back, working the ovens. Everything looked exactly the same as it had a week ago, except Vivian wasn't there anymore. She turned away before Sophia could see her crying. That night at dinner, Luca noticed the emerald dress hanging in her room when he came to walk her downstairs. "Sophia chose well," he said. "She has good taste." "So do I. That's why I hired her." He offered his arm. After a moment, Vivian took it. "You went past the bakery today." It wasn't a question. Of course he knew. He probably knew everything that happened within a 10-mile radius of anything he cared about. "I needed to see it," she said. "I understand." "Do you? I know what it's like to be pulled away from the life you knew, to have to become someone different because the alternative is worse." They walked down the grand staircase together. "The difference is, I was born into this. You're being dragged into it against your will. That's harder." Vivian looked at him, surprised. "You're being unusually honest tonight." "I'm always honest with you." "Are you?" "Yes. I might not tell you everything, but I don't lie to you, Vivian. I won't start now." They ate dinner together, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel hostile. It felt almost comfortable, like 2 people getting used to each other's presence. Afterwards, Luca walked her back to her room. He paused at the door. "The engagement dinner is in 3 days," he said. "Are you ready?" "No." "Good. If you were, I'd worry you were underestimating what you're walking into." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to be fine, Vivian. Better than fine. These people are going to underestimate you because you're young and you're not from their world. Use that. Let them think you're just a pretty face with no substance, and then surprise them." "How?" "By being exactly who you are. Smart, observant, stronger than you look. He reached out like he was going to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it and let his hand drop. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start preparing for real. Vivian watched him walk away down the hallway, and she realized something that should have terrified her. She was starting to trust him. Not completely, not blindly, but enough to believe that maybe he meant what he said when he promised to keep her safe. It was a dangerous thing to feel, but she felt it anyway. 3 days later, Vivian stood in front of the mirror in the emerald dress while Sophia pinned her hair into an elegant twist. Her hands were shaking. "Breathe, signorina," Sophia said gently. "You're going to be wonderful." "I'm going to throw up." "Not in that dress, you're not. It's too expensive." Despite everything, Vivian laughed. There was a knock at the door. Luca stepped in, and Vivian's breath caught. He was in a full tuxedo, perfectly tailored, and he looked every inch the powerful man he was. But when he saw her, something in his expression softened. "You look beautiful," he said. It was the first time he'd said anything like that. Vivian felt her face flush. "Thank you." He crossed to her, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I should have given you this earlier." Inside was a ring. Not the massive, showy diamond she'd expected, but something more subtle. An emerald surrounded by small diamonds, elegant and understated. Luca took her left hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "How did you know my size?" she asked. "I'm very thorough." He didn't let go of her hand. "Are you ready?" "No, but I don't think that matters anymore." "It matters. But you're right that we're out of time." He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. "Stay with me. Don't let go. And remember, you're not alone in this." They walked downstairs together, toward the dining room where Sicily's most dangerous families were waiting to meet the woman brave or foolish enough to marry Luca Santoro. And Vivian realized with a clarity that was almost frightening that she was about to find out exactly how strong she really was. The dining room had been transformed into something out of a dream or a nightmare, depending on how Vivian looked at it. Crystal chandeliers threw warm light across tables set with china so delicate it looked like it might shatter if someone breathed too hard. Flowers everywhere, white roses and something else she couldn't name, their scent almost overwhelming. And people. So many people, all of them dressed like they were attending a royal wedding, all of them turning to stare as Luca led her through the doors. Vivian's fingers tightened on his arm. He didn't acknowledge it, just kept walking with that same controlled grace, nodding to people as they passed. She tried to remember everything Sophia had taught her. Chin up, shoulders back. Smile, but don't overdo it. Don't meet anyone's eyes for too long. Luca. A man separated from a group near the bar, approaching with his hand extended. He was in his 50s, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once before too much good living had softened it. "Finally. We were beginning to think you'd keep her hidden all night." "Antonio." Luca shook his hand, his expression pleasant but unreadable. "I don't hide anything valuable. I protect it. There's a difference." The man's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked at Vivian with the kind of assessment that made her skin crawl, like she was a racehorse he was considering buying. "So this is the baker's daughter. I have to admit, Luca, when I heard the rumors, I thought someone was playing a joke." Antonio's tone was light, but the insult underneath was clear. "But here she is, in the flesh." "Here I am," Vivian said before she could stop herself. Antonio's eyebrows rose. Luca's grip on her hand tightened fractionally. Warning or encouragement, she couldn't tell. "And she speaks," Antonio said. "How refreshing. Most of the women at these things are too busy trying to look decorative to bother with conversation." "Then you've been talking to the wrong women," Vivian replied, keeping her voice level. For a moment, Antonio just stared at her. Then he laughed, loud and genuine. "I like her, Luca. She's got spine. You chose better than I expected." "I always do." Luca steered Vivian away smoothly, his hand warm against the small of her back. When they were out of earshot, he leaned down slightly. "Well done. Antonio respects people who push back. You just earned points." "I thought you said to keep my answers brief." "I said brief, not silent. There's a difference." His mouth quirked. "You're doing better than I expected." They made their way through the room, and Vivian tried not to feel like she was on display. Luca introduced her to what felt like 100 people whose names she'd never remember. The Rossi family, all three ambitious sons and their cold-eyed father, the Catalanos, whose matriarch looked like she could kill someone with a glance, the Bianchis, the Lorenzos, the Ferraros. All of them part of the web Sophia had shown her, all of them connected by blood and money and violence, and all of them watching Vivian like she was a puzzle they were trying to solve. Don Santoro, a woman's voice, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. What a lovely party. Vivian turned and immediately recognized her from Sophia's briefing. Victoria Marchesi. Mid-40s, beautiful in the way expensive maintenance and good genetics could make someone beautiful, dressed in black that probably cost more than Vivian's childhood home. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. Victoria. Luca's tone was polite. Nothing more. Thank you for coming. Oh, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Victoria's gaze slid to Vivian, assessing and dismissive in the same glance. So you're the girl who caught Luca's attention. How charming. The word girl was deliberate, a reminder that Vivian was young, inexperienced, out of her depth. And you must be Victoria, Vivian said, keeping her voice pleasant. Luca's mentioned you. It was a lie. Luca hadn't mentioned her at all. But Victoria didn't need to know that. Something flickered behind Victoria's perfect smile. Has he? How interesting. I'm sure whatever he said was terribly complimentary. He said you never miss an opportunity to make an entrance. Victoria laughed, but it sounded forced. Well, he's not wrong. She turned her attention back to Luca, her expression shifting into something warmer, more familiar. We should talk later about the shipping contracts. I have some concerns about the new routes. My office, tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Luca's tone made it clear the conversation was over. Enjoy the party, Victoria. Victoria's smile went brittle at the edges. She nodded once, sharp and precise, then glided away into the crowd. She hates me, Vivian said quietly. She hates that I'm marrying someone who isn't her. It's not personal. It feels personal. It's not. Victoria's problem is with me, not you. You're just a convenient target. Luca guided her toward a quieter corner of the room. But you handled her well, better than well. Before Vivian could respond, a man appeared at Luca's elbow. Young, maybe 30, with nervous energy radiating off him like heat. Don Santoro. A word? Luca's expression didn't change, but Vivian felt him tense. Not now, Carlo. It's urgent, about the warehouse situation. I said not now. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Carlo paled slightly and backed away. What warehouse situation? Vivian asked. Nothing you need to worry about. But Luca's jaw was tight, and his eyes had gone colder. Stay here, don't move, I'll be back in 5 minutes. He disappeared into a side corridor with Carlo before Vivian could argue. She stood there, suddenly very aware that she was alone in a room full of people who were all part of a world she didn't understand. Sophia had warned her about this. Don't wander off. Don't let anyone corner you alone. Don't give anyone an opportunity to probe for weakness. She moved toward the wall, trying to look casual while her heart hammered. A server passed with champagne. Vivian took a glass just to have something to do with her hands. You look lost. The voice came from behind her. Vivian turned and found herself looking at a man she didn't recognize from Sophia's briefing. Younger than most of the people here, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair and darker eyes, and a smile that probably worked on most women. I'm fine, Vivian said. Are you? You look like you're about to bolt. He extended his hand. Marco Tedesco. And you're the famous Vivian De Luca. Or will be Vivian Santoro soon, I suppose. She shook his hand briefly. Nice to meet you. Is it? You don't look like you're enjoying yourself very much. It's my engagement party. I'm having a wonderful time. The lie came out smoother than she expected. Marco laughed. You're a terrible liar, but I appreciate the effort. He leaned against the wall beside her, close enough that it would look intimate to anyone watching. Can I give you some advice? I don't know. Can you? Everyone in this room is trying to figure out if you're an asset or a liability to Luca. If you look weak, you become a target. If you look strong, you become a threat. You need to find the space in between. And what space is that? Dangerous enough to respect, loyal enough to trust, smart enough to fear, but not ambitious enough to challenge. Marco's smile didn't waver. It's a narrow line. Most people can't walk it. Why are you telling me this? Because I like Luca, and I think he might have actually chosen well this time, even if he did it for all the wrong reasons. Marco pushed off from the wall. Good luck, Vivian. You're going to need it. He vanished into the crowd before she could respond. Vivian stood there, processing that strange conversation, when someone else approached. A woman this time, older, with kind eyes that looked out of place in this room. You must be exhausted, the woman said gently. All these introductions, all these faces. It's overwhelming, isn't it? A little, Vivian admitted. I'm Giulia Rossi, Antonio's wife. She offered a sympathetic smile. I remember my first event like this. I thought I was going to faint from sheer terror. You were in an arranged marriage too? All marriages in our world are arranged, dear. Some are just arranged with more warning than others. Giulia glanced around the room. Can I tell you a secret? Vivian nodded. Half the people here are just as scared as you are. They've just had more practice hiding it. Giulia patted her hand. You're doing fine. Better than fine. You haven't cried, you haven't run, and you managed not to slap Victoria when she was being insufferable. That's a victory. Despite everything, Vivian smiled. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The hard part hasn't even started. But Giulia's expression was warm. If you ever need someone to talk to, someone who isn't Luca or his staff, you can find me. I know what it's like to feel alone in a crowded room. She squeezed Vivian's hand once and moved away. Luca reappeared moments later, his expression dark. Whatever Carlo had told him, it wasn't good news. We need to make the announcement, he said quietly. Now. What's wrong? Nothing you need to worry about. Just stay close to me. He led her to the center of the room. Someone handed him a glass, and the crowd gradually quieted, all eyes turning toward them. Vivian's stomach twisted. Thank you all for coming tonight, Luca began, his voice carrying easily across the room. I know many of you have been curious about the rumors circulating over the past week, so let me put those rumors to rest. He turned to Vivian, and for a moment, his expression softened in a way that might have looked genuine if she didn't know better. This is Vivian De Luca. In 2 weeks, she'll become my wife. The room erupted in polite applause, though Vivian could see the calculation behind every smile. People were already adjusting their strategies, recalculating alliances, figuring out what this marriage meant for them. Vivian comes from a good family, Luca continued. Honest people, hardworking. The kind of people this island was built on before we all got too comfortable with our own importance. There were a few genuine laughs at that. Luca raised his glass. To Vivian, and to the future. To the future, the room echoed. Vivian managed to smile and nod, and not collapse from the weight of all those eyes on her. Luca's hand found hers, warm and steady, and she held on like it was the only solid thing in a room that suddenly felt like it was tilting. The rest of the evening blurred together. More introductions, more careful conversations where every word felt like it was being weighed and measured, more smiles that didn't quite reach people's eyes. Vivian's feet ached in the expensive heels Sophia had chosen, and her face hurt from maintaining a pleasant expression. Finally, mercifully, people began to leave. Luca walked her through the goodbyes, his hand never leaving the small of her back. When the last guest had gone and the staff began cleaning up, Vivian felt like she'd run a marathon. You did well, Luca said, leading her away from the dining room. I feel like I just survived a battlefield. You did, and you came out the other side intact. That's more than most people manage their first time. He paused at the base of the staircase. Go rest. You've earned it. Vivian started up the stairs, then stopped. Luca? He turned back. Yes? What did Carlo tell you? The urgent thing about the warehouse? For a moment she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that made him look suddenly tired. Someone's been moving against me, small things, subtle, but tonight they made a mistake and got sloppy. His expression hardened. I'm handling it. Is it dangerous? Everything I do is dangerous, Vivian, but this... He stopped, seemed to reconsider whatever he was about to say. This is nothing you need to worry about. Not yet. Not yet. But eventually? Eventually you'll need to know everything, but not tonight. He looked at her, and there was something almost gentle in his eyes. Tonight, You did exactly what I needed you to do. Let that be enough. Vivian wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, to understand what was happening in the world she'd been dragged into. But she was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, and Luca was right. Tonight had been enough. She went upstairs, kicked off the torture devices masquerading as shoes, and collapsed onto the bed, still wearing the emerald dress. Tomorrow, she'd ask more questions. Tomorrow, she'd demand to understand the danger Luca had mentioned so casually. Tomorrow. But tonight, she let herself feel the small victory of having survived her first real test. She woke to sunlight and the sound of shouting. Vivian sat up, disoriented, still in the emerald dress that was now hopelessly wrinkled. The shouting was coming from somewhere downstairs, multiple voices, all of them angry, one of them definitely Luca's, though she'd never heard him sound like that before. She scrambled out of bed and opened her door. One of Luca's men was stationed in the hallway. He looked tense. "What's happening?" she asked. "Nothing, signorina. Please stay in your room." "That doesn't sound like nothing." "Don Santoro is handling a situation, please." Another crash from downstairs. Vivian pushed past the guard and ran down the stairs before he could stop her. The shouting was coming from Luca's office. The door was partially open, and through the gap, Vivian could see Luca facing off against a man she didn't recognize. The stranger was about Luca's age, shorter but built like a boxer, with a scar running down the left side of his face. "You think you can just take what's mine?" the man was saying, his voice tight with rage. "You think because you're Don Santoro you can do whatever you want? I think you made a deal and you're trying to back out of it now that the terms don't suit you." Luca's voice was cold, controlled, but Vivian could hear the edge underneath. "That's not how this works, Enzo." Enzo. The name clicked. This was Enzo Carbone, the man who'd originally lent Vivian's father money, the man whose debt Luca had bought. "The deal was with DeLuca, not with you. You had no right. I had every right. You sold me the debt. That makes it mine." Luca took a step forward. "And now you're angry because you realize too late that you gave me leverage you can't take back. That girl is worth more than 40,000 euros and you know it." Vivian's blood went cold. "That girl," Luca said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "is my fiancée. And if you ever refer to her as a commodity again, I'll make sure you regret it in ways you can't currently imagine." Enzo laughed, sharp and bitter. "You can't threaten me, Santoro. I have friends. People who remember when your father ran things and didn't let power go to his head. My father is dead. I'm not." Luca's tone didn't change, but the threat was clear. "And your friends are about to learn a very important lesson about the consequences of backing the wrong horse." "Is that what this is about? The warehouse? You think burning down my operation is going to make me fall in line? I think it's going to make you remember that crossing me has a price." Luca's eyes were flat, emotionless. "Now get out of my house before I decide that price needs to be paid in blood instead of property." Enzo's face went purple with rage. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet." Two of Luca's men appeared in the doorway, clearly summoned somehow. They flanked Enzo, not touching him but making the message clear. Enzo looked like he wanted to argue more, but whatever he saw in Luca's face stopped him. He turned and stormed out, shoving past the guards. Vivian stepped back into the hallway, pressing herself against the wall. Enzo passed without seeing her, radiating fury. When his footsteps had faded, she stepped into the office doorway. Luca was standing by his desk, his hands braced against the surface, his head bowed. When he looked up and saw her, something flickered across his face. Not quite guilt. Something more complicated. "How much did you hear?" he asked quietly. "Enough." Vivian's voice was steadier than she felt. "He called me a commodity. And I corrected him. By burning down his warehouse. That's what he meant, wasn't it? The urgent thing Carlo told you last night. You had someone destroy Enzo's property." Luca straightened, his expression closing off. "Yes." "Why?" "Because he needed to understand that you're not a bargaining chip, that our engagement isn't something he gets to have an opinion about." Luca's jaw was tight. "And because he's been making moves against me for weeks, and I needed to remind him why that's a bad idea." "So you set his warehouse on fire." "I had it done. There's a difference." Vivian wanted to be horrified, should have been horrified, but all she felt was a strange, cold understanding that this was the world she'd married into. a world where violence was currency and property destruction was a measured response. He said, "I'm worth more than 40,000 euros, she said. What did he mean? Luca was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. He meant that once our engagement was announced, you became valuable. Not as a person, as a connection to me. People will try to use you, Vivian, to get close to me, to gain leverage, to find weaknesses they can exploit. Enzo's realizing that if he'd held on to your father's debt, he'd have a direct line to my household. And now he doesn't. Now he doesn't. So you really did protect my family. By buying the debt, you cut off that avenue." "Yes." Luca crossed to her, stopping a few feet away. "I told you I would keep them safe. I meant it." Vivian looked at him, at this man who'd burned down a warehouse to prove a point, who'd threatened Enzo Carbone with the kind of casual menace that suggested he'd done worse, who commanded an empire built on fear and violence and strategic cruelty, and who'd kept his promise to her. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I make sure Enzo understands that the lesson is learned, and he doesn't try anything stupid." Luca's expression softened slightly. "And you go have breakfast and try to pretend you didn't just witness a conversation you weren't supposed to hear. I'm part of this now, whether I want to be or not. You said it yourself, people will try to use me. That means I need to understand what's happening. Eventually, yes, but not all at once. There are things you're not ready to know yet, or things you're not ready to tell me. Both." He didn't try to deny it. "I'm trying to protect you, Vivian, from information that could put you in danger, from choices you'd have to make that you're not prepared for, from the full weight of what my life actually looks like. And what if I don't want to be protected? What if I want to understand what I'm walking into?" Luca studied her for a long moment. Then he moved to his desk, pulled out a file, and handed it to her. "This is a summary of my current business operations. Not all of them, just the ones that are relevant to the immediate threats I'm managing." His expression was unreadable. "Read it, and then we'll talk." Vivian took the file. It was thicker than she expected. "What's in here?" "The truth. Or part of it." Luca's eyes didn't leave hers. "Be sure you really want to know before you open it." She looked down at the folder in her hands. This was the line, she realized. Cross it, and there was no going back. No pretending she didn't understand the full scope of what Luca did. No maintaining the comfortable fiction that she was just a baker's daughter who happened to marry someone powerful. "I want to know," she said. Luca nodded slowly. "Then read it. When you're done, find me. We'll talk." He walked past her, pausing at the door. "Vivian?" She turned. "Whatever you think of me after you read that, remember that I'm trying to build something different than what my father built. It might not look like it, but I am." He didn't wait for her to respond before leaving. Vivian stood alone in his office, holding the file that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Then she took it back to her room, locked the door, and started reading. 2 hours later, she understood exactly why Luca had warned her. The file was clinical, almost boring in its attention to detail. But the details themselves painted a picture of an empire that touched almost every aspect of Sicily's economy. Shipping contracts that were really about controlling the ports, construction deals that determined which buildings got built and which didn't, waste management companies that were fronts for more profitable and less legal operations, protection rackets, money laundering networks, connections to politicians, judges, police officers, and throughout it all, a pattern of carefully managed violence. Threats delivered through intermediaries, pressure applied strategically, physical force used sparingly but decisively when other methods failed. Luca's world wasn't just criminal, it was sophisticated, organized, and so deeply embedded in the legitimate economy that separating the legal from the illegal would be almost impossible. She also found references to recent problems. Shipments going missing, contracts being challenged, competitors making moves into territory Luca considered his, and underneath it all, a name that kept appearing, Marco Tedesco. The man who'd given her advice at the engagement party, who told her how to navigate the narrow space between threat and asset, who was apparently one of Luca's primary rivals for control of the northern shipping routes. Vivian closed the file and sat there, trying to process everything she'd just learned. Her fiancé wasn't just a crime boss. He was the crime boss. The man who controlled more of Sicily's economy than probably any legitimate business did. who had judges in his pocket and politicians on his payroll and enough power to reshape entire districts with a word. And she was about to become his wife. The knock on her door made her jump. "It's me," Luca's voice came through the wood. "Can I come in?" Vivian unlocked the door. He stepped inside, still in the clothes from this morning, though he looked more tired than he had earlier. "You read it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. And I understand why you wanted to wait." Vivian set the file on the table. "Marco Tedesco is your rival. He's one of them. There are others. But he's the one you're most worried about." Luca's expression didn't change, but she could see the acknowledgement in his eyes. "He's ambitious, smart, well-connected, and he's been making moves that suggest he thinks he's ready to challenge me directly." "Is he?" "No, but he doesn't know that yet." Luca sat down on the edge of her bed, a gesture that felt surprisingly intimate. "What else did you take away from the file?" "That everything you do is connected to everything else. That you can't just stop being what you are because it's all woven together." Vivian sat down across from him. "And that you're probably in more danger than you let on." "I'm always in danger. It comes with the territory." "The wedding is in less than 2 weeks. What happens if someone tries something before then?" "Then I handle it." He looked at her steadily. "This is what I was trying to spare you from, Vivian. The knowledge that danger isn't hypothetical. It's constant, and marrying me puts you in the middle of it. I was already in the middle of it the moment you walked into my bakery." "Fair point." They sat in silence for a moment. Vivian thought about everything she'd learned, everything she now understood about the world she was entering. "I'm still going to marry you," she said finally. Luca's eyes widened fractionally. "You are?" "My family's still in danger if I don't. And you've kept your word so far. You've protected them. Protected me in your way." She met his gaze. "But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "No more secrets. Not about things that could get me killed. If I'm walking into danger, I need to know what I'm facing." "That's a big ask." "It's a fair one." Luca was quiet, considering. Then he nodded. "All right. No more secrets. Not about immediate threats." He paused. "But there are some things I still can't tell you. Not because I don't trust you, but because knowing them would make you a target." "Like what?" "Like the names of people I work with outside Sicily. Financial arrangements that could compromise you if you were ever questioned by authorities. Details about operations that haven't been executed yet." His expression was serious. "I'm trying to find a balance, Vivian, between keeping you informed and keeping you safe." It wasn't perfect, but it was, she thought, probably the best she was going to get. "Okay," she said. "I can work with that." Luca stood up, and for a moment he just looked at her. Then he did something unexpected. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "You're stronger than I thought you'd be," he said quietly. "Most people would have run by now." "Where would I run to?" "That's not the point. The point is, you're choosing to stay, even knowing what you know now. Don't get used to it. I might still change my mind." This time, his smile was real. "Fair enough." He left, and Vivian sat alone in her room with the file and the weight of everything she now understood. In less than 2 weeks, she'd be married to one of the most dangerous men in Sicily. She'd be walking into a world where violence was routine and betrayal was expected, and nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. And somehow, impossibly, she was starting to think she might actually be able to survive it. The days before the wedding moved too fast and too slow at the same time. Vivian spent her mornings with Sophia, learning protocols she'd need to know as Luca's wife. Which families to greet first at formal events. How to deflect questions she couldn't answer. The proper way to acknowledge respect without showing weakness. Afternoons were hers mostly. She'd claimed the library as her sanctuary, spending hours reading or just staring out the windows at the manicured grounds that were starting to feel less like a prison and more like just where she lived now. Evenings were for Luca. They'd fallen into a pattern without discussing it. Dinner together, usually in the smaller dining room instead of the formal one. Conversations that started stilted and gradually became something almost comfortable. He'd ask about her day. She'd ask about his work, and he'd tell her what he could, which was more than she'd expected after reading that file. "Tedesco made another move," Luca said one night, cutting into his steak with more force than necessary. "Tried to undercut one of my contracts at the port. Offered the union a better deal. Did they take it? No, but the fact that he approached them at all is a problem. Luca set down his knife. He's testing boundaries, seeing how far he can push before I push back. What are you going to do? Remind him why pushing is a bad idea. He said it so casually, like they were discussing the weather. Nothing dramatic, just a conversation that makes my position clear. Vivian had learned that conversation in Luca's world could mean anything from an actual discussion to something involving broken bones. She didn't ask for details. When do I get to see my parents? She asked instead. Tomorrow, if you want. The engagement's been public long enough that a visit won't raise questions. Luca's expression softened slightly. I'll have Marco drive you. He'll stay outside, give you privacy. The same Marco who taught me to shoot? Yes. He's trustworthy and subtle, which matters when you're trying to avoid drawing attention. The idea of seeing her parents after nearly 2 weeks felt both wonderful and terrifying. What would she even say to them? That she was fine? That marrying Luca was turning out to be less awful than she'd feared? That she was starting to understand his world in ways that probably should have horrified her, but instead just felt like information she needed to survive? Thank you, she said quietly. Luca just nodded, like it was nothing, like he hadn't been the one keeping her from them in the first place. That night she dreamed about the bakery, about flour on her hands and bread in the oven, and her mother singing while she worked. She woke up with tears on her face and an ache in her chest that wouldn't go away. Marco picked her up at 9 the next morning in an unmarked car. He was the same quiet, efficient man who'd taught her weapon basics, but in the car, he was almost friendly. Nervous? He asked. A little. They'll be happy to see you. That's all that matters. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Don Santoro said to tell you that you have 2 hours. After that, we need to get back. Why only 2 hours? Because any longer, and it looks like he's being lenient. That's weakness. 2 hours is generous but controlled. Marco's tone was matter-of-fact. Everything he does is calculated, Signorina. You'll get used to it. Would she? Vivian wasn't sure, but she didn't argue. The bakery looked exactly the same. Same faded awning, same worn steps, same hand-painted sign her grandfather had made 40 years ago. Vivian's throat tightened as Marco parked across the street. I'll be here, he said. Take your time. The bell over the door chimed when she walked in. Her mother was at the counter, boxing up pastries for a customer. She looked up at the sound, and her whole face transformed. Vivian. The customer forgotten, her mother rushed around the counter and pulled Vivian into a hug so tight it hurt. Vivian hugged back just as hard, breathing in the familiar scent of sugar and vanilla and home. Let me see you. Her mother pulled back, hands on Vivian's shoulders, studying her face like she was checking for injuries. Are you all right? Are you safe? I'm fine, Mama, I promise. Her father appeared from the back, flour dusting his apron. When he saw Vivian, his eyes went red. Piccola. They stood there in the middle of the bakery, the three of them holding on to each other while the customer shuffled awkwardly and then quietly left. When they finally broke apart, her mother locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. Sit, she ordered. I'll make coffee. They sat at one of the small tables, the same ones Vivian had wiped down 1,000 times. Her father couldn't seem to stop looking at her, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he blinked. Tell us everything, her mother said, setting down espresso cups with shaking hands. The truth. Not what you think we want to hear. So Vivian told them. Not everything. She left out the file, the details about Luca's business, the complexity of the world she was navigating. But she told them about the villa, about Sofia, about how Luca had kept his word about their safety, about the engagement party and the wedding coming up in less than a week. And he treats you well? Her father asked, his voice rough. He doesn't hurt you? No, Papa, he's been... Vivian searched for the right word. Fair. Distant sometimes, but fair. Fair. Her mother's laugh was bitter. You shouldn't have to settle for fair, Tesoro. You should have love. Romance. A man who chose you because he couldn't imagine his life without you. I know, but that's not the world I'm in anymore. Vivian reached for her mother's hand. I'm learning to live with it, and honestly, it's not as terrible as I thought it would be. Her parents exchanged a look that Vivian couldn't quite read. What? She asked. Nothing, her mother said quickly, too quickly. Mama? Another long look. Then her father sighed. A man came by, 3 days ago. Asked questions about you. Vivian's stomach dropped. What kind of questions? About your routine before the engagement, where you went, who you spent time with, if you had any close friends outside the family. Her father's hands clenched. I told him nothing, but he frightened me, Piccola. The way he looked, the way he talked, like he was gathering information for something. What did he look like? Young, dark hair, expensive suit, had a scar here. Her father touched his cheek, indicating a line below his left eye. Not anyone from the engagement party. Not anyone Vivian recognized from Sophia's briefings, which meant this was someone operating outside Luca's immediate circle. Did you tell Luca's people? Vivian asked. Tell them what? That a man asked questions? They'd think we were being paranoid. Her mother's voice was tight. But you need to be careful, Vivian. Something about this doesn't feel right. I will. I promise. Vivian squeezed her mother's hand. And I'll tell Luca. He'll look into it. They spent the rest of the visit talking about safer things. The bakery's business, which was doing better since word had spread about their connection to Luca. Neighbors who'd suddenly become much friendlier. Her mother's plans for the garden. Normal things that felt precious precisely because they were normal. When Marco knocked on the door to signal time was up, Vivian felt the same ache from her dream. The desperate wish that she could stay here, in this small safe space, and pretend the last 2 weeks hadn't happened. But she couldn't. So she hugged her parents goodbye, promised to visit again soon, and got back in the car. Everything all right? Marco asked as they pulled away from the curb. A man came to the bakery asking about me. 3 days ago. Dark hair, scar under his left eye, expensive suit. Marco's expression went cold and professional. Did your parents get a name? No, he didn't offer one. I'll tell Don Santoro as soon as we're back. He glanced at her again. You did the right thing, telling me. When they arrived at the villa, Luca was in his office with 3 other men Vivian didn't recognize. Marco knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. We have a problem. Luca looked up, saw Vivian standing behind Marco, and his expression shifted. Everyone out. The 3 men left immediately. When the door closed, Luca turned his full attention to Marco. Talk. Marco relayed what Vivian had told him, precise and efficient. Luca's face didn't change, but Vivian saw his hands tighten on the desk. When exactly? Luca asked. 3 days ago. Around noon, according to the parents. And they're sure about the scar? Yes. Luca was quiet for a moment, clearly running through possibilities. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. Carlo, I need you to pull surveillance from the DeLuca bakery 3 days ago, noon to 2 p.m. Check all the cameras in a 3-block radius. He paused. Yes, now. I'll wait. He hung up and looked at Vivian. Describe everything your father told you. Every detail. Vivian repeated the conversation, watching Luca's expression for clues about what this meant. When she finished, he was already making another call. Antonio? I need information about someone. Male, mid-20s, dark hair, scar below the left eye. Italian, well-dressed, asking questions about my fiancé in the old quarter 3 days ago. Another pause. Call me back. This time when he hung up, he stood and crossed to the window, staring out at the grounds. Luca? Vivian ventured. Who do you think it was? I think it was someone working for Tedesco, testing how much access he has to you through your family. Luca's voice was tight with controlled anger, which means he's escalating faster than I expected. What does that mean for my parents? It means they're about to get permanent security whether they want it or not. He turned back to her. And it means the wedding timeline just became non-negotiable. We do this in 6 days as planned, and then you don't leave this estate without a full security detail. You can't just lock me up. I can and I will if it keeps you alive. Luca's eyes were hard. Tedesco is sending a message, Vivian. He's showing me that he can get close to you if he wants to, that he can use you as leverage, and I'm about to send a message back that makes it very clear what happens to people who threaten what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have made her angry. Instead, it made her feel something she didn't want to examine too closely.
"What are you going to do?" she asked.
What I should have done 2 weeks ago. Remove him as a threat permanently. Luca's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression went deadly cold. Carlo found him on camera, and I know exactly who he works for. Tedesco. Worse, he's one of Enzo Carbone's men, which means Enzo and Tedesco are working together. Luca looked at Marco. Call everyone. Full meeting in 20 minutes, and double security on the De Luca family starting now. Marco nodded and left. Vivian stood there, trying to process what this meant. Enzo's the man from your office, she said, the one who was angry about you buying my father's debt. Yes, and apparently he's decided to ally with Tedesco to come after me. Luca's jaw was tight, which is either very brave or very stupid. I'm betting on stupid. What happens now? Now I make it clear that threatening you was the last mistake either of them will ever make. He moved toward the door, then paused. Stay in the villa. Don't go outside without telling Sofia where you are. If anyone you don't recognize tries to approach you, scream. Someone will come. Luca. I mean it, Vivian. These men are dangerous, and they're backed into a corner. Cornered animals do desperate things. His expression softened fractionally. I can't protect you if you don't let me. Then he was gone, leaving Vivian alone in his office with the sudden, cold understanding that the danger she'd been learning about theoretically had just become very, very real. The next 3 days were tense. Luca was barely at the villa, always in meetings or making calls or dealing with situations he wouldn't explain. When he did come home, he looked exhausted and dangerous, like a man running on fury and coffee. Vivian saw her wedding dress during this time. Sofia brought it to her room. White silk, simple and elegant, probably worth more than her family's bakery had made in the last year. She tried it on and barely recognized herself in the mirror. You look beautiful, signorina, Sofia said softly. I look like someone else. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Sofia adjusted the veil. The girl who walked into this villa 2 weeks ago wouldn't have survived what's coming, but the woman you're becoming might. Vivian thought about that after Sofia left. About the fact that she'd stopped flinching when Luca's men appeared with guns visible in their holsters. About how she'd read that file detailing criminal operations, and her first thought had been strategic rather than horrified. About the way she'd started thinking in terms of alliances and threats instead of right and wrong. She was changing, whether she wanted to or not. The night before the wedding, Luca finally came home at a reasonable hour. He found her in the library, curled up in what had become her favorite chair. Can't sleep? He asked. Tomorrow, I'm getting married to a man I've known for less than 3 weeks. Sleep seems optimistic. She looked up at him. Did you handle it? Whatever you needed to handle with Enzo and Tedesco? I'm handling it. He sat down across from her and she could see the tension in his shoulders. Enzo's operation is essentially dismantled. Tedesco is being more difficult, but he'll fall in line once he realizes he's lost his ally. What did you do to Enzo? Do you really want to know? Vivian thought about it. No, probably not. Smart. Luca leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. Your parents will be at the wedding tomorrow. Small ceremony, immediate family only, like I promised, and then a larger reception in the evening. And after that? After that, you're officially untouchable. My wife. Part of the family in a way that makes targeting you the same as targeting me directly. He opened his eyes. It won't stop everyone, but it will stop most people. That's comforting. It's realistic. His gaze softened. Are you ready for tomorrow? Does it matter if I'm not? Yes, it does. Luca leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I know this isn't what you wanted, Vivian. I know I'm asking you to step into a life that terrifies you, but I need you to know I'm going to keep you safe, whatever it takes. Even if it means burning down more warehouses? Even if it means burning down the entire island. He said it like a promise, like a vow he was making before the official ones tomorrow. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine. There it was again. That possessiveness that should have made her angry but instead made her feel something warm and complicated. I'm not a thing to be owned, she said, but there was no heat in it. No. You're a person I'm choosing to build a life with. There's a difference. Luca stood up. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He left, and Vivian sat in the library for a long time, thinking about vows and promises, and the strange fact that she was starting to trust the most dangerous man in Sicily. The morning of the wedding, Vivian woke to sunlight and Sofia knocking softly on her door. "It's time, signorina." The ceremony itself was small, just like Luca had promised. The villa's chapel, Vivian hadn't even known there was a chapel until today, was simple and beautiful, all old stone and filtered light. Her parents sat in the front row, her mother crying quietly into a handkerchief. A handful of Luca's closest associates filled the other seats, and Luca stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, watching her walk down the aisle with an expression she couldn't quite read. The priest spoke in Italian and Latin, words about commitment and partnership and building a life together. Vivian barely heard them. She was too focused on Luca's hands holding hers, warm and steady. On the way, he was looking at her, like she was something precious he'd fought to keep. "I, Luca Santoro, take you, Vivian De Luca, to be my wife. I promise to protect you, to stand beside you, to trust you with the truth of who I am." His voice was low but clear. "I promise to be yours, as you are mine." The traditional vows, but with Luca's own additions. Vivian's throat tightened. Her turn. "I, Vivian De Luca, take you, Luca Santoro, to be my husband. I promise to—" She hesitated, then decided to follow his lead. "I promise to trust you, to try to understand your world, to be stronger than I think I can be." Luca's eyes softened. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it took her breath away. The priest pronounced them married. Luca kissed her, chaste and brief, and suddenly Vivian was Vivian Santoro, the baker's daughter who'd become the wife of Sicily's most powerful crime boss. The reception that evening was larger, louder, filled with faces Vivian recognized from the engagement party. But this time she walked through the room with her hand in Luca's, and people looked at her differently, with respect instead of calculation, with caution instead of curiosity. She was protected now, officially, permanently. Victoria Marchesi appeared halfway through the evening, beautiful and cold as always. She congratulated them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Such a lovely ceremony," Victoria said. "I'm sure you'll be very happy together." "We will be," Luca said simply. Victoria's smile went sharp. "I certainly hope so. Marriage can be so difficult when you don't really know your partner." "Then it's fortunate I know exactly who I married," Luca replied, his tone pleasant but his eyes hard. "Now, if you'll excuse us." He steered Vivian away before Victoria could respond. "She's never going to stop hating me, is she?" Vivian asked. "Probably not, but her hatred doesn't matter anymore." Luca's hand was warm against her back. "You're my wife now. That makes you untouchable." The word echoed in Vivian's head, untouchable, protected, safe. At least in theory. The party went late into the night. Vivian danced with Luca. He was surprisingly good at it, and with her father, who held her too tight and whispered apologies she didn't want to hear. She smiled until her face hurt and made small talk until the words lost meaning. Finally, mercifully, the last guest left. Luca walked her upstairs, his hand warm in hers. They stopped outside her room. Tomorrow, Sofia had explained, Vivian's things would be moved to the master's suite. But tonight, Luca had insisted she keep her own space. "You survived," he said. "Barely." "That counts." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Thank you. For today. For all of this." "You're thanking me. You're the one who forced this arrangement." "I know. But you could have made it so much harder than you did. You could have fought me every step of the way, made yourself miserable, made me miserable." His eyes held hers. "Instead, you tried. You adapted. You gave this a chance even when you had every reason not to." Vivian didn't know what to say to that, so she stood on her toes and kissed him instead, brief and soft. When she pulled back, Luca looked stunned. "What was that for?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe I'm just tired of fighting." She reached for her door handle. "Good night, Luca." "Good night, Vivian." She went inside and leaned against the closed door, her heart pounding. That kiss had been impulsive, maybe stupid, but it had also felt right in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. She was married to Luca Santoro, and somehow, impossibly, she was starting to think that maybe she could actually build a life with him. But that fragile hope shattered at dawn when the first gunshots rang out across the estate. Vivian jolted awake to the sound of breaking glass and shouting. For half a second, still caught in sleep, she thought it was thunder. Then another gunshot cracked through the pre-dawn quiet, close enough that she felt it in her chest, and her body understood what her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Someone was attacking the villa. She rolled out of bed, her heart slamming against her ribs. More gunfire, rapid and chaotic, coming from multiple directions. The security alarm started shrieking. Footsteps pounded in the hallway outside her room. Her door burst open. Not Luca, one of his men, the older one named Paolo, who'd been with him for years. Signorina, Signora Santoro, I mean, we need to move you now. What's happening? No time. Come with me. Paolo grabbed her arm, already pulling her toward the door. Vivian was still in the nightgown she'd worn to bed, barefoot, completely unprepared for whatever this was. The hallway was chaos. More of Luca's men running past with weapons drawn, shouting in rapid Italian. Somewhere downstairs something exploded, not big, but loud enough that Vivian flinched. "Where's Luca?" she demanded. "Handling it. My orders are to get you to the safe room." Paolo dragged her down a hallway she'd never been in before, toward the back of the villa. More gunfire. Closer now. Someone was screaming. They rounded a corner and nearly ran into Sophia, who was herding two of the younger housekeeping staff toward the same destination. Sophia's face was pale, but calm, and seeing her helped Vivian's panic recede slightly. "How many?" Sophia asked Paolo. "At least a dozen, maybe more. They breached the east wall." Paolo shoved open a door that looked like it led to a storage closet but opened onto a narrow staircase going down. "Quickly!" The safe room turned out to be a reinforced space in the basement, all concrete walls and a heavy steel door. Paolo ushered them inside. Vivian, Sophia, the two terrified maids, and an older woman Vivian vaguely recognized from the kitchen staff. "Stay here," Paolo ordered. "Don't open this door for anyone except Don Santoro or me, you understand?" "What about you?" Vivian asked. "I'm going back up to help." He was already turning away. "Paolo..." But he was gone, the heavy door swinging shut behind him with a final sounding thud. Vivian heard the lock engage from the outside. They were trapped down here. Safe, maybe, but trapped. Sophia moved to a panel on the wall and flipped a switch. Monitors flickered to life, showing grainy security camera feeds from around the estate. Vivian pressed closer, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The east wall was definitely breached. She could see the hole where something had blown through the stone. Armed men in dark clothes were streaming through, spreading out across the grounds. And Luca's men were meeting them, gunfire lighting up the pre-dawn darkness in sharp bursts. "There," one of the maids whispered, pointing at a monitor showing the front entrance. "Is that—" Vivian's breath caught. Enzo Carbone was there, standing behind a line of armed men like he was commanding them. And beside him, talking on a phone, was Marco Tedesco. So they'd come together. Both of Luca's enemies, working in coordination. This wasn't just an attack, it was an execution. "Where's Luca?" Vivian demanded, scanning the monitors frantically. "Sophia, where is he?" "There?" Sophia pointed to a feed showing the main hall. Luca was visible, surrounded by at least 10 of his men, all of them armed. He was on his phone, his face hard and cold, and even through the grainy footage, Vivian could see the controlled fury in every line of his body. As they watched, Luca said something sharp into the phone, then hung up and started issuing orders. His men dispersed immediately, moving with the kind of precision that spoke to extensive training. Luca himself headed toward the front of the villa, toward where Enzo and Tedesco were coordinating their assault. "He's going to confront them," Vivian said, her voice tight. "He's going to walk right into—" "He knows what he's doing," Sophia said, but her voice wavered slightly. More explosions outside. The lights in the safe room flickered, but held. On the monitors, Vivian watched Luca's men engaging the attackers in a running battle across the grounds. Bodies were falling, on both sides. The neat manicured gardens Vivian had looked at from her window for the past 3 weeks were turning into a war zone. "How many men does Luca have?" Vivian asked. "Here at the villa? Maybe 30. But he has reinforcements coming from the city." Sophia's eyes were locked on the monitors. "They'll be here soon. Enzo and Tedesco know that. They're trying to end this quickly." "End this how?" Sophia didn't answer. She didn't have to. They wanted to end this quickly, They needed to take Luca out before his reinforcements arrived, which meant Luca was walking into a trap designed specifically to kill him. On the monitor, Luca had reached the front entrance. He stepped outside, flanked by 4 of his men, and Vivian watched Enzo's face transform into something ugly and triumphant. "No," she whispered. "No, Luca, don't." But he was already moving forward, closing the distance between himself and the men who wanted him dead. Enzo said something Vivian couldn't hear. Luca responded, his expression carved from ice. For a moment, they just stood there, 2 groups of armed men facing off while the battle raged around them. Then Tedesco raised his gun. Everything happened too fast. One of Luca's men shoved him sideways just as Tedesco fired. The shot went wide, hitting the man who'd pushed Luca instead. He went down hard. Luca rolled, came up with his own weapon, and fired 3 times in rapid succession. 2 of Tedesco's men dropped. Tedesco himself dove behind a stone planter. And then it was chaos. Both sides opening fire, the careful standoff dissolving into a close-quarters firefight. Vivian lost track of Luca in the confusion of bodies and muzzle flashes and smoke. "Where is he?" she demanded, pressing closer to the monitors. "Sophia, where—" "There," Sophia pointed. Luca had taken cover behind one of the villa's stone columns, reloading with the kind of efficiency that spoke to too much practice. Blood streaked his left arm, but he was still moving, still fighting. Enzo was shouting orders, trying to coordinate his men, but Luca's people were better trained, more disciplined. Even outnumbered, they were holding their ground. Then one of the monitors went dark. Then another. Someone was systematically taking out the cameras. "They're cutting our feeds," Sophia said, her voice tight. "They don't want us to see what's coming." The last monitor showing the front entrance flickered and died. Vivian was left staring at static, her imagination filling in terrible possibilities. "We have to get out there," she said. "Absolutely not. Paolo's orders were—" "I don't care about Paolo's orders. Luca's injured, and he's outnumbered, and I'm not sitting down here while—" Vivian moved to the door, grabbed the handle, locked, just like she'd known it would be. "How do we open this?" "We don't. It's controlled from outside only." Sophia grabbed Vivian's arm. "Signora, please. Don Santoro gave very specific instructions about keeping you safe. If something happens to you, everything he's fighting for up there becomes meaningless." "And if something happens to him?" Vivian's voice cracked. "If he dies because I was down here hiding while he—" A massive explosion cut her off, so loud and close that the entire safe room shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. One of the maids screamed. When the ringing in Vivian's ears cleared, she could hear new sounds from above. More shouting, but different now. Triumphant on one side, desperate on the other. The remaining monitors were all showing empty corridors and grounds. No sign of fighting, no sign of anyone. Sophia's phone buzzed. She grabbed it, read the message, and her face went white. "What?" Vivian demanded. "What does it say?" "It's from Marco. Paolo, I mean. He says—" Sophia's hand was shaking. "He says Tedesco's men breached the main hall. They're inside the villa." Which meant the fighting had moved indoors. Which meant Luca's defensive perimeter had been broken. "We need to get out of here," Vivian said. "If they breach the villa, they'll eventually find this room. The door. Then we break it down. Or find another way out. We can't just sit here waiting for them to find us." Vivian was already moving around the room, looking for anything they could use. The safe room was well stocked with emergency supplies, water, first aid, even some weapons in a locked cabinet, but no obvious second exit. Sophia joined her, running her hands along the walls. There has to be something. Don Santoro wouldn't create a safe room with only one exit. He's too smart for that. The older kitchen woman spoke up, her voice quavering but determined. "There's a ventilation shaft in the ceiling. I helped install supplies down here last year. I remember the worker complaining about how narrow it was." They all looked up. Sure enough, there was a grate in the ceiling, maybe 2 feet square. Narrow, but potentially passable. "Where does it lead?" Vivian asked. "I don't know, but up, away from here." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than waiting to be found. Sophia dragged over a chair. Vivian climbed up and started working at the grate screws with a knife from the first aid kit. Her hands were shaking so badly, it took 3 tries to get the first screw out. Above them, through the ceiling, they could hear footsteps. Lots of them. And voices, speaking in rapid Italian. "Hurry," Sophia whispered. The last screw came free, and Vivian pulled the grate down. The shaft beyond was dark and cramped, and probably led nowhere useful. But it was a chance. "You first," Sophia said to the maids, "quickly." One of the younger women climbed up, boosted by Sophia and Vivian. She disappeared into the shaft with a whispered prayer. The second maid followed. "You next," Sophia said to the older woman. "I can't fit through there. Look at me." The woman gestured at herself. She was heavier set, definitely broader than the narrow shaft. "I'll slow you down. Go!" "We're not leaving you," Vivian said. "You are, because I'm ordering you to." The woman's voice was firm. "I've worked for the Santoro family for 30 years. I know what I'm doing. Now go, before it's too late." Sophia hesitated, then grabbed Vivian. "She's right. We have to move." Sophia went up next, surprisingly agile for someone her age. Then it was Vivian's turn. She grabbed the edge of the shaft and pulled herself up, her arms screaming with the effort. The space was even more cramped than it had looked from below. She had to army crawl forward, the metal cold against her skin. Behind her, she heard the safe room door bang open. Voices, harsh and male. A scream, cut short. Vivian kept crawling, forcing herself not to think about what was happening to the woman they'd left behind. The shaft climbed at an angle, getting steeper. Her nightgown snagged on something and tore. She barely noticed. Ahead, Sophia had stopped at what looked like a junction. 2 directions, left or right. "Which way?" Sophia whispered. "I don't know. Right. Go right." They went right, crawling through darkness with only the faint light from the safe room behind them fading to nothing. Vivian's knees were bleeding. Her hands ached, but she kept moving. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they reached another grate. Through the slats, Vivian could see a room, one of the villa's ground floor corridors, currently empty. Sophia kicked the grate out. They dropped down into the hallway, landing hard. The 2 maids were already there, huddled against the wall. The villa was eerily quiet now. No more gunfire, no more explosions, just an occasional shout from somewhere distant. "We need to find Luca," Vivian said. "We need to get you out of here," Sophia corrected. "There's a service exit this way. If we can reach the garage, I'm not leaving without Luca. Signora, I said no." Vivian's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. "He's my husband. I'm not abandoning him." Sophia looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But we do this smart. Stay behind me. Stay quiet. And if I say run, you run." They moved through the villa like ghosts, keeping to the walls, freezing every time they heard voices. The place looked like a war zone. Bullet holes in the walls, broken glass everywhere, blood on the marble floors. They found the first body near the main staircase, one of Luca's men, someone Vivian had seen around but never learned the name of. His eyes were open and empty. Sophia pulled her past before she could look too long. Voices ahead made them duck into a side room, one of the formal sitting rooms Vivian had been shown during her first tour of the villa. Through the partially open door, they could see Tedesco and 3 of his men walking past, weapons in hand. "Can't find her," one of them was saying. "The safe room's empty except for one old woman. Santoro's wife is gone." "Then find her," Tedesco snapped. "She's the leverage we need. Without her, he won't negotiate." "He's not going to negotiate anyway. You saw what he did to Enzo." What he did to Enzo, past tense, which meant, "Enzo's dead?" Tedesco's voice was sharp. "Bled out 5 minutes ago. Took 3 rounds to the chest when he tried to rush Santoro's position." A pause. Then Tedesco laughed, bitter and harsh. "Idiot! I told him frontal assault wouldn't work, but he was so convinced his revenge was worth more than his life." Another pause. "Where's Santoro now?" "East wing, barricaded in with maybe 6 men left. We have him pinned." "Good. Keep him there. I'll deal with him personally once we find his wife." The footsteps moved away. Vivian waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then looked at Sophia. "He's in the east wing," she whispered. "That's where my room was. He's near, and surrounded by Tedesco's men. We can't reach him." "We have to try." Sophia started to argue, then seemed to realize it was pointless. "The service corridors. We can move through them without being seen. But Signora, if this goes wrong, if we're caught, then we're caught. But I'm not hiding anymore." Vivian meant it. The terrified baker's daughter, who'd been dragged into this world 3 weeks ago, was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, willing to fight for what she'd decided to keep. They moved through the service corridors, the narrow passages the staff used to move around the villa unseen. The two maids they'd brought from the safe room stayed close, their faces pale with fear but their steps determined. The east wing was quieter than the rest of the villa, but that made it more tense, not less. Vivian could hear men talking in low voices, the click of weapons being reloaded, the occasional crackle of a radio. Sophia held up a hand, stopping them at a corner. Ahead, the corridor opened into the hallway that led to what used to be Vivian's room. And there, barricaded behind overturned furniture, was Luca. He looked terrible. Blood soaked his left sleeve from a wound Vivian couldn't see. His face was streaked with dirt and powder burns. But his eyes were clear and focused, his gun steady in his hand. 5 men were with him. No, 4, Vivian realized as she counted. One was slumped against the wall, clearly dead. The others looked almost as bad as Luca, all of them showing signs of injury or exhaustion. And down the hallway, blocking their exit, were at least a dozen of Tedesco's men, waiting, patient. They had Luca trapped, and they knew it. "We need a distraction," Sophia whispered. "Something to pull some of those men away so Luca can break through." Vivian looked at the service corridor they were in. At the emergency supplies cabinet she could see mounted on the wall, at the fire alarm panel 10 feet away. "I have an idea," she said, "but you're not going to like it." Before Sophia could stop her, Vivian pulled the fire alarm. Immediately, the villa's alarm system screamed to life. Sprinklers activated throughout the building, water pouring from the ceiling. Emergency lights started flashing, and most importantly, Tedesco's men reacted exactly the way Vivian had hoped, with confusion and chaos. "What the hell? Is it real? Is there actually a fire? Check the east corridor. Someone pull that alarm." Half of them broke off to investigate, leaving the barricade less defended. Luca saw his chance immediately. He erupted from cover, firing as he moved, his remaining men following his lead. It was brutal and efficient. Luca dropped 2 men before they could react. His men took out 3 more. The hallway became a killing ground, and Luca moved through it like the dangerous man he was. Tedesco appeared from a side room, saw what was happening, and aimed his weapon at Luca's back. "No!" Vivian screamed, sprinting out of the service corridor before anyone could stop her. Tedesco's head snapped toward her. Luca whirled, his expression going from cold focus to pure horror in an instant. "Vivian, get down!" But Vivian was already moving, throwing herself at Tedesco with more fury than sense. She wasn't armed, she wasn't trained, but she'd learned enough from Marco's weapons lessons to know where vulnerable points were. She drove her elbow into Tedesco's throat. He choked, stumbling back, his shot going wide. Vivian grabbed for his gun hand, trying to wrench the weapon away. They struggled for a moment that felt like an eternity. Tedesco was stronger, bigger, trained in ways Vivian would never be. But she was desperate, fighting for Luca's life and her own, and sometimes desperation was enough. The gun went off between them. For a heartbeat, Vivian couldn't tell who'd been hit. Then Tedesco's grip went slack and he collapsed, blood spreading across his chest. Vivian stood there, frozen, the gun falling from her nerveless fingers. She'd killed him. She'd actually killed someone. "Vivian," Luca's voice cutting through the shock. He was suddenly there, pulling her away from Tedesco's body, his hands on her face. "Look at me. Are you hurt? Did he hit you?" No, I don't think so. I don't." Vivian's voice was shaking. Everything was shaking. "You're okay. You're going to be okay." Luca pulled her against his chest, one hand in her hair. She could feel his heart hammering as hard as hers. "What the hell were you thinking? You could have been killed." "So could you." "That's different." "No, it's not." Vivian pulled back enough to look at him. "I'm your wife, Luca. I'm not hiding in a basement while you die protecting me. That's not who I am." He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he kissed her, hard and desperate, tasting like smoke and blood and relief. When they broke apart, Sophia had appeared with reinforcements. Not Tedesco's men, but Luca's, the ones from the city who'd finally arrived. "The estate is secured on Santoro," one of them reported. "Remaining attackers have either surrendered or fled. We're doing a full sweep now." Luca nodded, still holding Vivian like he was afraid she'd disappear. "Casualties?" Ours, 8 dead, 12 injured. Theirs, at least 20 dead, handful captured. 8 of Luca's men. Dead because Enzo and Tedesco had decided Vivian was worth killing for. She looked down at Tedesco's body and felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse. Just a cold certainty that he'd made his choice and suffered the consequences. "We need to get you checked by a doctor," Luca said, already guiding her away from the scene. "Both of us. Your arm, grazed, looks worse than it is." But he was pale under the dirt and blood, clearly in more pain than he was admitting. The next several hours blurred together. Doctors arriving, tending to the injured, police showing up and leaving again after brief conversations with Luca. Conversations where money clearly changed hands. The bodies being removed, the villa being cleaned, evidence disappearing with the efficiency of long practice. Vivian sat in what had been her room, before it had taken fire damage during the attack, and let herself process what had happened. She'd killed a man. She'd watched people die. She'd survived an assault that could have ended very differently. And through it all, the only thing she'd really cared about was making sure Luca survived too. When had that happened? When had she stopped seeing him as her captor and started seeing him as hers? There was a knock on the doorframe. Luca stepped in, his left arm now properly bandaged, wearing clean clothes, though he still looked exhausted. "Your parents are safe," he said without preamble. "I had them moved to a secure location the moment the attack started. They're asking about you." "Can I see them?" "Tomorrow, once we're sure there are no more threats." Luca crossed to her, sat down on the edge of the ruined bed. "You should know, the attack is being called a home invasion. 3 armed men, tragic casualties, all suspects either dead or arrested. The official story. And the unofficial story? Enzo Carbone and Marco Tedesco attempted a coordinated assault to eliminate me and take control of my territories. They failed. Their organizations are being absorbed into mine as we speak." His expression was hard. "The message has been sent. No one touches what's mine." There was that possessiveness again. But this time, Vivian didn't bristle at it. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we rebuild. Strengthen security. Make sure everyone knows that this kind of challenge ends badly." Luca's hand found hers. "And we finish what we started." "What do you mean?" "I mean we build a life together. A real one. Not just an arrangement." His eyes held hers. "You saved my life today, Vivian. You could have stayed hidden in that safe room. You could have run when you had the chance. Instead, you came for me. You fought for me. You're my husband. What else was I supposed to do? Most people would have chosen safety over loyalty." Luca's thumb brushed over her knuckles. "But you're not most people. You're stronger and braver than I ever expected, and I—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. "I need you to know that this stopped being just business for me somewhere along the way. You're not just my wife on paper, Vivian. You're mine in every way that matters." Her breath caught. "Luca, I'm not good at this. At feelings. At saying what I mean without it sounding like a negotiation." He looked almost vulnerable, this man who commanded an empire. "But I care about you. More than I thought I was capable of caring about anyone. And I need to know if there's any chance you could feel the same." Vivian thought about the past 3 weeks. About how she'd gone from terrified prisoner to reluctant participant to something else entirely. About how Luca had kept his promises, protected her family, treated her with a respect she hadn't expected. About how she'd felt when she thought he was going to die. "I think I already do," she said quietly. "Feel the same. I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you read poetry in the library. Maybe when you admitted you regretted your life. Maybe when you looked at me during the wedding like I was something precious." She squeezed his hand. "But somewhere along the way, you stopped being the man who bought me and started being just mine." Luca pulled her close, and this time when he kissed her, it was slow and careful and full of promises neither of them said out loud. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "This isn't going to be easy," he warned. "My life. Our life. It's always going to be dangerous. There will always be threats. Always be people trying to use you against me." "I know. But I'm not the same person who walked into your office 3 weeks ago." Vivian pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I'm stronger now. I can handle it." "I know you can. That's what terrifies me." But he was smiling, soft and genuine. You're supposed to be my weakness, Vivian. Instead, you're becoming my greatest strength. They sat there in the ruined room while dawn broke outside, holding on to each other while the villa slowly came back to life around them. Over the next week, Vivian watched Luca systematically dismantle what remained of his enemy's operations. Tedesco's shipping routes were absorbed. Enzo's remaining associates either fell in line or disappeared. The power vacuum was filled so quickly and efficiently that within days, it was like neither man had ever existed. And through it all, Luca kept Vivian close, not locked away for protection, but beside him. He started teaching her the business, explaining decisions, asking her opinion on matters he easily could have handled alone. She sat in on meetings, learned the complex web of alliances and rivalries, started to understand the empire she'd married into. She also moved into the master suite, into Luca's space, and slowly, carefully, they started building something real. 1 month after the wedding, Vivian visited her parents at the bakery. They were under permanent protection now, one of Luca's men always nearby, though discreet enough not to be intrusive. Her mother pulled her into the kitchen, away from customers and security. "Are you happy?" she asked bluntly. "Really happy. Not just telling me what I want to hear?" Vivian thought about it. About Luca reading beside her in the library at night. About the way he touched her face when he thought she was sleeping. About how he'd started asking her advice before making major decisions, genuinely listening to her input. About the life they were building together. Complicated and dangerous, and nothing like what she'd imagined for herself, but somehow right anyway. "Yeah, Mama," she said. "I think I actually am." Her mother studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Good. Because you're different now, stronger. You look at the world like you own part of it." "Maybe I do. Just don't lose yourself completely, Tesoro. Don't forget the girl who wanted to teach literature and bake bread." "I won't, but that girl needed to grow up sometime." Vivian kissed her mother's cheek. "And maybe this is who I was always supposed to become." That night, she told Luca about the conversation. They were in bed, his arm around her shoulders, both of them exhausted from a long day of managing the fallout from the attack. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "The life you could have had?" "Sometimes, but not as much as I thought I would." Vivian traced patterns on his chest. "I miss the simplicity. The idea that the biggest problem in my day would be whether the bread rose properly. But that life, it was small, safe, and I think I would have felt trapped eventually anyway. And this doesn't feel like a trap. This feels like I traded one cage for another, but at least this cage has you in it." She looked up at him. "And at least here, I'm learning to be strong enough to break out if I ever need to." Luca laughed quietly. "That's terrifying and comforting at the same time." "Good. You should be a little afraid of me." "Believe me, I am." They fell asleep tangled together, and Vivian dreamed not of bakeries and books, but of standing beside Luca as his equal, both of them facing whatever came next. 6 months later, Vivian sat in on a meeting with the Rossi family. Antonio and his sons wanted to discuss a potential partnership, merging their construction interests with Luca's shipping operations. She watched the negotiation unfold, saw how Luca gave ground on small points while holding firm on what mattered. And when Antonio's oldest son tried to propose terms that would have put Luca at a disadvantage long term, Vivian spoke up. "That's not going to work," she said calmly. "The profit split you're suggesting assumes equal risk, but your side has significantly less exposure. If you want Don Santoro's shipping network, you need to match that value fairly." The room went quiet. Antonio's son stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Even Luca looked faintly surprised. Then Antonio laughed. "She's right. We were trying to get a better deal than we deserved." He looked at Luca. "Your wife is sharp. You chose well." "I know," Luca said simply, and the warmth in his voice made Vivian's chest tight. They renegotiated the terms fairly, and when the meeting ended, Luca caught her hand as they walked back to his office. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Do what?" "Speak up. Support my position." "You could have stayed quiet. Let me handle it." "I could have. But we're partners, aren't we? That means I support you when it matters." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, they were trying to screw you over. I wasn't going to just sit there and let it happen." Luca pulled her into his office and closed the door. Then he kissed her, deep and thorough, until she was breathless and laughing. What was that for? For being exactly who you are. For being strong enough to hold your own in my world. For choosing to stay when you could have found a way out months ago. He cupped her face in his hands. For being mine. I am yours, Vivian said, but you're mine too. Don't forget that. Never. And he meant it, because somewhere in the past months, the arrangement that had started with a debt and a desperate choice had transformed into something neither of them had expected. Love, maybe. Or at least something close enough that the distinction didn't matter. They'd both learned to trust when trust should have been impossible. They'd both found strength in each other when they should have been adversaries. And they'd both discovered that sometimes the things you're forced into become the things you can't imagine living without. Vivian DeLuca had walked into Luca Santoro's world as a prisoner, a commodity, a means to an end. But she'd become Vivian Santoro, partner, equal, the woman who'd stood beside Sicily's most dangerous man and refused to break. And if that wasn't a kind of victory, she didn't know what was. The bakery still stood in Palermo's old quarter, run by her parents with the security and prosperity that came from being connected to the Santoro family. Vivian visited when she could, bringing Luca sometimes, watching him charm her mother and talk football with her father like he was just a normal son-in-law instead of the man who controlled half of Sicily. Life was good. Complicated, dangerous, nothing like the simple future she'd once imagined. But good. And when Luca held her at night, whispering promises in the dark about protecting her and trusting her and building something lasting together, Vivian believed him. Because he'd kept every promise he'd made since the day he'd walked into her family's bakery and changed her life forever. Some people were born into their destinies. Others had destiny forced upon them. And sometimes, if you were lucky and strong and stubborn enough, you took that forced destiny and made it yours anyway. Vivian had done exactly that, and she wasn't finished yet.